Slavery is one of those topics that many people find uncomfortable to talk about. In today's world, it often feels like a taboo subject. When the topic comes up, most of the attention goes to the transatlantic slave trade, the brutal system that brought millions of Africans to the Americas. That part of history is extremely important, but it isn't the full story. What many people don't know is that slavery happened all over the world, across many different cultures, races, and religions. It wasn't only Africans who were enslaved. In fact, millions of Europeans were once taken as slaves, too. This part of history has been mostly forgotten or left out, but it deserves to be remembered. One major example of this overlooked history is the white slave trade, especially in the Mediterranean region. From the 16th to the 19th centuries, pirates based in North Africa captured and enslaved up to 1.25 million Europeans. These pirates were known as Barbary corsairs, and they operated from places like Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, and Libya. They attacked ships and raided villages, capturing people to sell as slaves. Their victims came from countries such as Italy, Spain, France, England, Ireland, and even Iceland. This slave trade was not a small or rare event. It went on for centuries and affected thousands of communities. In fact, in 1797, the U.S. government spent about 1/5 of its entire budget paying money to North African leaders just to free enslaved Americans and to stop further attacks. That shows just how serious and widespread this problem was. One of the most shocking events in this history happened in 1631 in the small coastal village of Baltimore, Ireland. In the middle of the night, around 200 pirates landed silently on the beach. They crept through the dark, waited outside homes, and then stormed inside. People were dragged from their beds, men, women, and children, and taken to ships waiting offshore. A total of 107 villagers were kidnapped and later sold in the slave markets of Algiers. This event spread fear across many European coastal towns. Some places were abandoned entirely because people were too scared of being taken. The impact of these raids was huge. Coastal towns lost people, trade slowed down, and communities lived in constant fear. This fear wasn't only in the Mediterranean. Even areas far away like England, Ireland, and the Netherlands felt the effects. Governments had to build coastal defenses and start regular naval patrols just to protect their citizens from being kidnapped. So what happened to the people who were taken as slaves? The conditions they faced were terrible. Many didn't survive the journey to North Africa. They died from hunger, thirst, or disease while packed tightly into ships. Those who did survive were brought to slave markets. There they were paraded in front of buyers, chained, nearly naked, and treated like property. Men were often forced to do heavy labor. Some worked in quarries or construction, others were used to row in galleys, large ships powered by human oarsmen. These galley slaves had one of the worst fates. They were chained to their seats, unable to move. They ate, slept, and even used the bathroom without ever leaving their place. They could spend months or even years like this. Overseers would whip them to keep them rowing, and if they slowed down or stopped, they were punished brutally. Women were often used for domestic tasks, but many were also forced into sexual slavery. Children were sometimes raised in new cultures and even trained as soldiers. Some became part of the Ottoman military system, growing up far from the families and lives they were taken from. Before the Barbary corsairs became powerful, the Mediterranean Sea was mostly dominated by Christian pirates, especially those from Catalonia and Sicily. They were also involved in raiding and capturing people. But things changed in the 15th century when the Ottoman Empire began to grow. The Ottomans supported Muslim corsairs, helping them rise as a major threat to Christian shipping. By the 16th century, the Barbary corsairs were well organized and dangerous. They attacked the ships of powerful countries like Venice, Spain, and France. But things became even worse in the 17th century when some European pirates joined forces with the corsairs. These European pirates brought with them better ships and sailing techniques. This allowed the corsairs to sail farther and attack countries like England, Ireland, and Portugal. It's important to understand that this slave trade was not just about religion or race. While the most common story is about Muslim pirates capturing Christian slaves, the reality was more complex. People of all races and religions were captured and sold: black, white, brown, Catholic, Protestant, Orthodox, Jewish, and even Muslim. The corsairs were not all Muslim either. Some English and Dutch privateers took part in the raids, working for their own profit. Robert Davis, a historian who studied this topic deeply, points out that slavery in Barbary was not based on race. It was about who could be captured and sold. It was about labor and power, not skin color or belief. Davis also explains that this part of history has often been ignored because it doesn't fit the usual story of Europeans always being the oppressors. In this case, many Europeans were actually the victims. The suffering of Barbary slaves was real and intense. Their daily lives were filled with pain, fear, and humiliation. Living spaces called bangios were cramped and extremely hot. Slaves had no rights and were treated as tools or objects. Many never saw their homes or families again. Eventually, the power of the Barbary corsairs began to fade. In the late 1600s and into the 1700s, European navies grew stronger. Countries like Britain, Spain, and France started to fight back more forcefully. The United States also got involved. In 1816, a major raid by British and Dutch forces on Algiers forced the corsairs to release Christian slaves and agree to new terms. But even then, slavery didn't fully end. It wasn't until the 1800s and early 1900s, when European powers invaded and took over parts of North Africa, that the Barbary slave trade was finally stopped. France invaded Algiers in 1830, Tunisia in 1881, and Italy took Tripoli in 1911. After these colonial takeovers, laws were passed to end slavery, and the remaining slaves were finally freed. Even though the Barbary slave trade has ended, slavery itself has not. Today, an estimated 38 to 46 million people around the world still live in some form of slavery. This includes forced labor, human trafficking, and other forms of exploitation. That's why learning about all sides of slavery, including those that have been forgotten, is so important. Remembering the story of the Barbary slaves helps us understand that slavery is a global issue with a long and complicated history. It affected people of all backgrounds and continues to affect people today. By learning the full truth, we can better fight against injustice and help build a more honest and informed future. History is never one-sided, and understanding all its layers, even the uncomfortable ones, helps us see the world more clearly. The story of the Barbary slave trade and the millions of forgotten victims reminds us that slavery wasn't just something that happened in one place to one group. It was a global tragedy that affected people of every background. If you found this video eye-opening, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss future deep dives into overlooked chapters of history. Share this video to help others learn the parts of the past that rarely get talked about. Drop a comment below. What surprised you the most about the Barbary slave trade? Let's talk about it. Until next time, stay curious, keep questioning, and never stop learning.